The crystal chandeliers in the Alexandria Country Club hum when the room gets quiet. I stood near the swinging kitchen doors holding a stack of misprinted place cards. My dress was navy blue, bought off a rack in a strip mall, hemmed by my mother on a Sunday afternoon. It felt heavy in a room full of custom silk and tailored tuxedo jackets. The air smelled of roasted tenderloin and expensive floral arrangements designed to wilt by midnight. At the front of the ballroom, bathed in the glow of the stage lights, stood my mother-in-law, Victoria Caldwell. She tapped her champagne flute with a silver spoon. 200 guests turned their attention toward her. These were defense contractors, federal judges, and lobbyists who traded access like currency. Men and women who decided the fate of national budgets over rounds of golf. Victoria smiled her practiced, glittering smile. She gestured toward the front tables, naming her siblings, her cousins, her daughter, Madeline. Then her gaze drifted to the back of the room, past the linen-draped tables, landing squarely on me by the kitchen doors. "And here is our Audrey," Victoria announced. Her voice echoed through the sound system, bright and sharp. "The one who married up. We love our little charity case. It takes a village to teach someone which fort to use." The ballroom erupted. It was that specific, polished laughter of the Northern Virginia elite, condescending and brief, designed to show solidarity with the speaker rather than genuine amusement. I did not drop the place cards. I simply shifted my eyes to my husband, Preston. He sat at the head table swirling his bourbon. He kept his gaze fixed on the ice cubes hitting the glass. He did not look at me. He expected me to swallow it. He expected me to smile and stay in the background, where I belonged. Victoria expected the results of her joke to humiliate me into submission. What she did not expect was that before the dessert course was served, I would dismantle her entire legacy in front of the exact people she spent her life trying to impress. Welcome to Cutie Told Stories, where quiet women stop accepting the roles they are handed and start writing the script. My name is Audrey Beatrice. I am 28 years old. If a family has ever used your bank account to fund their illusion, pull up a chair. Tell me in the comments, how old are you and where are you watching from tonight? I read every single one. To understand how I ended up at an anniversary gala standing with the catering staff, you have to go back 3 weeks to a Tuesday morning in my kitchen. Northern Virginia is not just a location, it is an ecosystem. Here your worth is measured by your zip code, your proximity to the capital, and the level of your security clearance. The Caldwells built their identity on this terrain. They considered themselves legacy. I was the daughter of a diesel mechanic and a triage nurse from a town where people bought their own groceries and mended their own clothes. To Victoria, my blue-collar roots were a stain she tolerated only because Preston insisted on marrying me. I learned early to keep my head down. I let them believe I was a mid-level desk worker handling basic tech support. It was easier than explaining the truth, and my actual job required silence anyway. I did not argue when Victoria made passive comments about my clothes. I did not fight back when Madeline excluded me from bridal showers and weekend trips. I played the part they wrote for me, the quiet, grateful wife who was lucky to be sitting at their table. That Tuesday morning, 3 weeks before the gala, the house was quiet. Preston had left early for his sales job, his tie knotted tight, his briefcase in hand. I sat at our kitchen island with a mug of black coffee, opening my laptop to balance our monthly budget. I prefer spreadsheets. Numbers do not lie, and they do not tell jokes at your expense. I pulled up our joint checking account. My eyes scanned the rows of transactions, groceries, the electric bill, a gas station charge from Monday afternoon. Then my cursor stopped. There was an outgoing wire transfer processed at 2 in the morning. The recipient was a boutique event planning firm in Georgetown. The amount was $14,000. $14,000 of the salary I had deposited on Friday. Gone. I set my coffee mug down. The ceramic clicked sharply against the granite counter. The Caldwells projected limitless wealth. They hosted dinners donated to political campaigns and drove cars that cost more than my parents' house. Yet a deposit for Victoria's anniversary gala had just been secretly siphoned from my paycheck while I slept. I traced the digital signature on the transfer. It took me less than a minute. The request was initiated from Preston's IP address. My husband had waited until I was asleep to drain our savings to pay for his mother's party. The quiet in the kitchen suddenly felt different. It was the silence of a house where a theft had just occurred. I closed the laptop. I did not call him. I did not scream. My training taught me that panic is a vulnerability. When you discover a breach, you do not alert the intruder. You sit still, you monitor the exits, and you build an airtight case. Before I met Preston, I managed my own finances with strict discipline. I paid my way through college. I cleared my student loans by 24. When we married, Preston suggested pooling our resources into a joint account to build our life together. He framed it as a partnership. I viewed it as trust. I now understood it was access. I reopened the laptop. I needed to see how deep the rot went. I pulled 3 months of banking statements, sorting the columns by vendor and amount. The $14,000 transfer was the largest, but it was not the only anomaly. There were smaller leaks. $800 to a country club catering service, $1,200 to a floral boutique in Alexandria, $2,000 to a valet company. Preston was bleeding our accounts dry a few $100s at a time, padding the lifestyle his parents could no longer afford. Every time Victoria hosted a Sunday brunch and boasted about her exclusive vendors, I was paying the invoice. A cold, clear focus settled over me. I did not feel the sting of a betrayed wife. I felt the sharp calculation of an analyst reviewing a compromised system. The Caldwells had spent years making me feel small, treating me like an unfortunate obligation they had to endure. They mocked my off-the-rack dresses and my practical shoes, all while reaching into my pocket to pay for their custom tailoring. I poured the rest of my coffee down the sink. I realized in that moment that the pristine, wealthy facade of the Caldwell family was built on a foundation of sand. They were not old money. They were an illusion, and they were using my money to keep the lights on. The charity case was funding the billionaires. They believed I was foolish enough to never look at the ledger. They thought my silence was ignorance. They had no idea that I spent my days hunting anomalies for a living, and they had just left a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to their front door. I logged out of the bank portal and cleared the browser history. The trap was already set, and I was going to let them walk right into it. The Caldwells liked to introduce me as a girl who worked with computers. In their circle, unless you were a senior partner at a law firm, a federal judge, or the heir to a defense contracting empire, your career was merely a hobby to pass the time between social engagements. Victoria often told her country club friends that I fixed internet routers for a local logistics office. I never corrected her. My actual profession required a level of silence that made their social posturing look like a high school theatrical production. I was a covert threat analyst for a top-tier defense contractor. I spent my days inside a secure, compartmented information facility, a windowless room wrapped in copper mesh to prevent electronic eavesdropping. I hunted digital anomalies. I tracked state-sponsored cyber espionage. I held a security clearance that required routine polygraphs and deep background investigations. I analyzed human deception for a living, picking apart the lies that people tried to hide in lines of code. This was the irony of my existence within the Caldwell family. They viewed me as a simpleton, a charity case, who needed guidance on proper etiquette. Meanwhile, my daily reality involved safeguarding classified intelligence that dictated national security. Tracking the stolen funds was an elementary exercise. I did not need government resources to follow the trail my husband clumsily left behind. I sat at my kitchen island, opened a secure terminal on my personal machine, and traced the routing numbers attached to the $14,000 wire transfer. The money had landed in the corporate account of a boutique event planning firm located on a cobblestone street in Georgetown. They were the primary vendors for Victoria's upcoming 35th anniversary gala. I cross-referenced the timestamp. The transfer had initiated at 2:14 in the morning. I checked the router logs for our home network. The request originated from Preston's personal phone. While I slept beside him, my husband had unlocked his screen, accessed our joint savings, and drained my hard-earned salary to pay for his mother's ice sculptures and imported champagne. The betrayal settled in my chest cold and hard. This was not a banking error. This was theft wrapped in a marriage certificate. My parents had worked physical labor their entire lives. My father ruined his knees beneath heavy machinery, and my mother spent 30 years walking hospital corridors on 12-hour shifts. They understood the value of a dollar because they traded their physical health to earn it. I inherited their work ethic, earning my salary through intense mental endurance. Preston had simply taken it, transferring my labor to his mother's vanity project with a few taps on a glass screen. Preston walked into the kitchen 20 minutes later. He adjusted his silk tie smelling of expensive cedar cologne and fresh shaving cream. He offered me his standard morning smile, the easy, practiced grin that used to make my heart race when we first met. He opened the refrigerator and poured a glass of cold water. "Morning," he said. His voice sounded smooth and untroubled. I leaned against the counter, keeping my posture relaxed. Interrogation training dictates that you never corner a subject immediately. You offer them an open door and watch how they choose to step through it. "I was looking at the accounts this morning," I said, keeping my tone conversational. "There was a $14,000 withdrawal from our savings. It went to a Georgetown event planner." Preston froze. It was a microscopic hesitation, a fractional delay in bringing the water glass to his lips. To an untrained observer, it meant nothing. To me, it was a blaring alarm. He lowered the glass and let out a practiced sigh, shaking his head as if dealing with a minor amusing inconvenience. "Oh, that. Yes, I meant to tell you about that last night, but you were already asleep." He leaned against the island, attempting to mirror my relaxed posture. "My parents ran into a slight liquidity issue with the gala vendors, a temporary float problem. Dad's trust fund disbursement is delayed until the end of the quarter due to some administrative red tape at the bank. Victoria was panicked about losing the deposit, so I went ahead and covered it. They will wire it back to us by next week." I watched his eyes. He broke eye contact, focusing instead on a smudge on the stainless steel refrigerator door. His blink rate increased. The pitch of his voice rose half an octave. He shifted his weight from his left foot to his right, grounding himself awkwardly. These were not the movements of a man explaining a simple banking delay. These were the baseline tells of active deception. The Caldwells did not have a trust fund disbursement issue. The Caldwells had a cash flow problem, and my husband was covering their tracks. Gaslighting relies on making the victim question their own perception of reality. Preston expected me to nod to accept the illusion of the trust fund and to apologize for questioning his loyalty. $14,000 is a significant amount to float without asking," I said quietly. Preston closed the distance between us. He reached out to rub my shoulder. It was a pacifying gesture designed to soothe and manipulate. "I know, honey. I should have woken you up. But you know how Victoria gets when she is stressed. I just wanted to handle it and keep the peace. You know family is everything to us." Family is everything. That was the weapon they used to extract compliance. I looked at the man I married. I saw the weakness behind his tailored suit. I did not scream. I did not throw my coffee mug. Confrontation without leverage is just a tantrum, and I was building a case. "Okay," I said, "just let me know next time." Preston exhaled a silent breath of relief, believing he had successfully navigated the crisis. He kissed my forehead, grabbed his leather briefcase, and walked out the front door, confident that his secret remained safe. The moment the deadbolt clicked into place, I opened a new file on my encrypted drive. I titled it with a random string of alphanumeric characters. Inside, I began a shadow ledger. I documented the $14,000 transfer. I logged the date, the time, and the false narrative Preston had provided in the kitchen. I added the previous withdrawals I had discovered earlier. I was no longer a wife managing a household budget. I was a threat analyst compiling a dossier on a hostile entity. Every stolen dollar, every lie, every manipulated conversation would be stored in this digital vault. I would let them continue to steal, documenting every infraction until the evidence was insurmountable. My phone vibrated against the granite counter, humming with a harsh, urgent rhythm. The screen illuminated, displaying Victoria's name. I let it ring 3 times, controlling my breathing, before I answered. "Audrey," Victoria said. She did not offer a greeting. She spoke with the brisk authority of a woman giving orders to a subordinate. "Good morning, Victoria," I replied. "I need you at the house today." Her voice carried the faint clinking of fine china, indicating she was likely sitting on her patio, enjoying a catered breakfast. "The florists are being impossible, and the invitation list is an unmitigated disaster. Since your schedule is so flexible, I expect you to come over and help sort this out. We have a monumental amount of logistics to handle before the gala." She did not ask, she demanded. She summoned me to her home to perform free labor for a party she had stolen my money to fund. The condescension in her tone was palpable. She truly believed my time held no value, that my sole purpose was to serve as her uncredited assistant. "I can be there in an hour," I said. My voice sounded smooth and perfectly compliant. "Do not dally," Victoria snapped and disconnected the line. I lowered the phone. The physical confrontation was set. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out a sensible, unassuming tote bag, slipping my encrypted tablet inside. I was walking directly into the antagonist's home turf, and I was going to map every square inch of their ruin. The Caldwell estate sits at the end of a winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. The brick facade is imposing, designed to intimidate delivery drivers and impress society columnists. I parked my modest sedan next to Victoria's imported luxury vehicle. Walking up the flagstone path, I felt the familiar, suffocating weight of this property. The air inside the house always smelled of lemon polish, fresh lilies, and unearned entitlement. It was a museum dedicated to their own perceived superiority. I stepped into the foyer, listening to the sharp click of my practical flats against the imported marble floor. I found Victoria and her daughter Madeline in the formal dining room. The long mahogany table was buried under stacks of heavy cream cardstock gold foil envelopes and bottles of imported ink. Madeline sat in a velvet chair sipping sparkling water. She was the golden child groomed from birth to marry a hedge fund manager and host charity luncheons. She had never held a job that required a tax form. Victoria stood at the head of the table, holding a clipboard like a battlefield commander. She did not offer me a seat. She did not ask about my morning. She simply pushed a thick leather binder across the polished wood. "The event planner is proving entirely incompetent," Victoria announced. "She mixed up the seating hierarchy for the federal judges. I fired her this morning. We are taking the logistics in-house." I looked at the binder. It contained 300 names, addresses, and dietary restrictions for the most powerful people in the district. "I need you to handwrite the addresses on these envelopes," Victoria continued. "The calligraphy must be flawless. You will also coordinate the updated seating chart with the caterers and manage the dietary requests. Since your schedule is so flexible, this should not be a problem for you." Her words were carefully chosen weapons. She knew I worked full-time. She simply chose to classify my career as a hobby, a trivial pursuit that could be dropped the moment she needed an unpaid assistant. The implication was clear. My time belonged to them. Madeline let out a soft, breathy laugh. She leaned over the table examining my outfit. "It is good that you are doing the back-end work, Audrey. You really do not have the wardrobe to meet with the vendors in person. Those shoes alone would terrify the florist." I looked down at my simple leather flats. They were designed for mobility and comfort during long shifts in a secure facility. They were not fashionable, they were functional. I did not defend my footwear. I did not defend my career. I played the role they required. "I can handle the invitations," I said quietly. My compliance seemed to relax them. They believed they had successfully asserted their dominance. While Victoria launched into a lecture about the importance of gold wax seals, my eyes scanned the dining room. Threat analysts are trained to spot environmental anomalies. We look for the detail that contradicts the established narrative. The room was staged to project flawless wealth, but my gaze caught on a sterling silver serving tray resting on the antique sideboard. Tucked beneath the heavy silver tray was a folded piece of paper. The edge protruding from the metal was printed with a distinct fluorescent pink border. Having grown up in a working-class household where bills were sorted on the kitchen table, I recognized that specific shade of pink immediately. It was a final notice from the county tax assessor. The Caldwells lived in a colonial estate, hosted galas for senators, and wore designer clothing. Yet they were hiding past due property tax notices under their silverware. They were house poor. Their entire existence was a leveraged illusion. The stolen $14,000 was not a temporary float. It was a desperate gasp for air. I gathered the heavy binder and the boxes of envelopes, stacking them neatly in my arms. I nodded politely to Victoria and Madeline, confirming my understanding of their absurd deadlines. I turned to walk toward the front door, planning my next digital inquiry. Victoria followed me into the foyer, her heels clicking sharply on the marble. She placed a manicured hand on my shoulder, stopping me before I reached the exit. She offered a smile that did not reach her eyes. "By the way, Audrey," Victoria said, her tone dripping with manufactured sympathy, "I wanted to let you know early so you would not be surprised. We simply could not find room on the guest list for your parents. The capacity issues at the country club are terribly strict this year. We had to prioritize the senators and the board members. I am sure they will understand. A gala like this is not really their scene anyway." The insult was calculated to inflict maximum emotional damage. My parents were kind, hard-working people who had welcomed Preston into their modest home with open arms. Victoria was excluding them to ensure her high society friends did not have to mingle with a retired mechanic and a nurse. She wanted me to cry. She wanted me to argue, to beg for their inclusion, which would only validate her power over me. I denied her the satisfaction. I adjusted the weight of the binder in my arms, looked directly into her eyes, and offered a serene, untroubled smile. "I understand perfectly, Victoria," I said. "Capacity issues are always difficult to manage." I turned the brass knob and walked out into the crisp morning air, leaving her standing in the foyer, slightly unsettled by my lack of reaction. I walked down the flagstone path and climbed into my sedan. I closed the door, locked it, and sat in the quiet confinement of the vehicle. I did not start the engine. I set the binder on the passenger seat. The adrenaline was a cold, sharp current in my veins. The puzzle pieces were rapidly assembling themselves into a terrifying picture. I pulled my encrypted tablet from my tote bag and connected to my secure mobile hotspot. My first action was defensive. Preston had already proven he would steal from our joint savings. If his family was facing property tax foreclosure, they would eventually seek larger sums. I accessed the 3 major credit bureaus. I initiated a total freeze on my Social Security number, locking down my personal credit profile. No one would be able to open a new account, secure a loan, or leverage my pristine financial history without a direct multi-factor authorization protocol that only I controlled. My assets were secured. Now I needed to understand the scope of the threat. I opened a restricted database, a tool typically reserved for vetting high-level defense contractors. I bypassed the standard public records and dug into the unvarnished financial history of my father-in-law. Richard Caldwell ran a commercial real estate and consulting firm. The social circles of Northern Virginia treated him like an industry titan. I queried his corporate tax identification numbers. The results populated on my screen in stark, unforgiving rows of data. The facade crumbled instantly. Richard was not a titan. He was a man drowning in a labyrinth of concealed debt. His firm had not closed a profitable deal in 3 years. He had leveraged his commercial properties to the legal limit, taking out secondary and tertiary loans to cover the interest payments on the primary mortgages. I scrolled through the corporate filings. The deeper I looked, the worse the reality became. Richard owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to private creditors. His credit lines were exhausted. His corporate accounts were operating on razor-thin margins, sustained only by moving money between shell companies to create the illusion of liquidity. The Caldwell family was functionally bankrupt. They were putting on a 35th anniversary gala to project strength to the exact people they owed money to, and they were using my stolen salary to buy the champagne. The copper-lined walls of a secure, compartmented information facility filter out the noise of the outside world. No cell phones are permitted, no unverified external internet connections exist. There is only the quiet, steady hum of isolated servers and the sterile glow of high-resolution monitors. I sat at my desk on Thursday morning, compiling a post-action report on a foreign intrusion vector, when my chief executive officer stepped through the reinforced glass doors. Marcus Reynolds is a man who speaks softly but dictates the gravity of any room he enters. He built our defense contracting firm from a modest cybersecurity startup into an intelligence powerhouse that briefs Pentagon officials on a weekly basis. He does not waste time with superficial pleasantries, and he rarely visits the analyst floor unless a situation requires his direct authorization. He walked into my office, pulled a chair across from my desk, and handed me a single heavy blue folder. Audrey, Marcus said, keeping his voice even and deliberate, "The executive board reviewed your threat matrix regarding the Eastern European energy grid hack. Your analytical models were flawless. You identified the vulnerability 3 weeks before the federal agencies caught the scent." He leaned forward, resting his hands on the edge of my desk. "We are restructuring the intelligence division. I am appointing you as the vice president of threat intelligence." The title hung in the cool, climate-controlled air. It was a position that commanded immense authority, a tier of leadership reserved for the sharpest minds in our industry. The promotion carried an elite security clearance upgrade, granting me unprecedented access to restricted federal databases. It also included a compensation package that rivaled the net worth of the politicians who frequented Victoria's lavish dinner parties. I accepted the role without hesitation, maintaining the composed exterior my profession demanded. Marcus shook my hand firmly, leaving the blue folder containing my new credentials on the desk before exiting the room. Armed with my upgraded clearance, the digital landscape cracked wide open. The administrative restrictions that previously bottlenecked my inquiries vanished, replaced by a seamless stream of raw, unfiltered data. I returned to the puzzle of my father-in-law. Richard Caldwell was hiding severe debt, but a man in his social position did not simply accumulate unpaid bills. He actively concealed them. I ran his commercial real estate firm through an advanced forensic financial tracking algorithm. My fingers moved rapidly across the mechanical keyboard, inputting variables and cross-referencing tax identification numbers. The software compiled the data, mapping out a dizzying web of transactions across my primary monitor. Richard was funneling money through a series of offshore shell companies located in jurisdictions known for their strict banking secrecy laws. The accounts were nested like Russian dolls, designed to confuse auditors and obscure the true origin of the funds. One anonymous entity paid another for fictitious consulting services, generating fake invoices to create a paper trail of legitimate business revenue. It was a sophisticated laundering operation, meant to keep domestic creditors at bay while maintaining his country club membership. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the glowing flowcharts. The irony settled over me, sharp and bitter. The Caldwells spent years treating me like a charity case. They snickered at my practical shoes, judged my off-the-rack dresses, and cast me as the poor wife who needed their cultured guidance. Meanwhile, they were functionally bankrupt, sustaining their aristocratic illusion through fraudulent accounting. Their legacy was a hollow shell, held together by financial crimes and the salary they stole from me in the middle of the night. That evening, I returned to our suburban home. Preston was lounging on the living room sofa, scrolling through his phone with a heavy theatrical sigh. "Mom is going overboard with the anniversary gala," he complained, not bothering to look up as I set my keys on the console table. "The caterers are charging a ridiculous premium, and Dad insists on importing the wine directly from a vineyard in France. You have no idea how much they are spending on this party, Audrey. It is stressful to watch them burn through cash." I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. I leaned against the counter and watched my husband perform his victim routine. He wanted my sympathy. He wanted me to validate the heavy burden of his wealthy lineage, acting as though the expenses were an unavoidable tragedy rather than a deliberate choice funded by my stolen income. I maintained a neutral, supportive expression. I played the obedient, understanding partner flawlessly. "I am sure it will be a beautiful event," I replied, keeping my voice smooth and untroubled. While Preston watched a sports broadcast in the other room, I sat at the dining table with my personal laptop. I did not log into our joint checking account. Instead, I accessed the client portal for a private wealth management firm. Using my newly increased executive salary and the substantial signing bonus from my promotion, I established a secure blind trust. I drafted the digital paperwork, ensuring that Preston had zero legal claim or visibility into the new accounts. I severed my direct deposits from the joint checking account, redirecting my future earnings to the private trust. I systematically untangled my financial identity from Preston, building an impenetrable legal wall around my assets. Every tax document, every routing number, every investment portfolio was isolated. When the Caldwell ship finally sank, it was not going to drag me into the depths. The following morning, I arrived at the secure facility before the sun crested the horizon. My new executive role required me to audit the cybersecurity protocols of our third-party vendors. Our defense firm handled highly sensitive logistics data for the armed forces, meaning every external contractor we employed required rigorous, continuous screening. I initiated a routine scan of the vendor database, sipping my black coffee as the screen populated with hundreds of corporate profiles. My eyes scanned the scrolling text, looking for outdated compliance certificates. Then my gaze caught a familiar string of words. Caldwell Commercial Holdings. The breath hitched in my throat. I clicked the entry, pulling up the full vendor profile. Richard's failing real estate firm was not just a random business struggling in Northern Virginia. He was a registered subcontractor for my employer. His company provided logistical warehousing space for non-classified defense materials. It was a low-tier contract, but it granted his corporate servers a direct digital tunnel into our unclassified administrative network. The conflict of interest was staggering, but the security implications were terrifying. A desperate man drowning in offshore debt with a backdoor into a defense contracting firm is the textbook definition of an insider threat. I opened a blank document, my fingers poised over the keyboard. I needed to draft an executive summary to flag the conflict to Marcus immediately. I had to act methodically, separating my personal connection from the professional risk. Before I could type the first sentence, a sharp, repetitive chime echoed from my secure terminal. The screen flashed, bathing my office in the red glow of an automated alert. A data breach attempt was in active progress. I abandoned the summary and pulled up the intrusion detection dashboard. Someone was actively trying to force their way into a restricted server containing proprietary defense schematics. They were deploying a brute force script, hammering the administrative firewall with thousands of password combinations a second. I engaged a tracking protocol, tracing the origin of the attack back through the digital relays. The attacker had routed their connection through several proxy servers to mask their location, but they were using an outdated tunneling method. I isolated the true signal, cutting through the digital noise. The footprint narrowed, bypassing the spoofed locations and resolving into a specific static Internet Protocol address. I locked the coordinates on my screen. I cross-referenced the numbers against our internal employee and vendor logs. The intrusion was not originating from a foreign intelligence agency or a shadowy hacker collective operating overseas. The address matched the exact coordinates of a registered vendor network. The ping was originating from the private home office of Richard Caldwell, the man who smiled at me over Sunday brunch, who mocked my upbringing while drinking expensive scotch, was attempting to steal classified defense data. He was breaching federal security protocols, presumably intending to sell proprietary schematics to cover his insurmountable offshore debts. This was no longer a domestic dispute over a stolen bank transfer. It was a federal crime, playing out in real time on my monitor. 4 days before the anniversary gala, Victoria mandated a formal dress rehearsal dinner. The Caldwells treated their social events like military campaigns. Perfection was not requested, it was required. Every floral arrangement, every seating assignment, every tailored hem had to be inspected and approved by the matriarch. I left the secure compartmented information facility after a 10-hour shift analyzing Eastern Hemisphere cyber threats. I changed from my tailored work suit into a modest gray sheath dress in the employee restroom before driving across county lines. The transition from safeguarding national intelligence to attending a faux aristocratic dinner party always induced a subtle cognitive dissonance. I pulled into the winding driveway of the estate. Preston was already there. He had arrived 2 hours early to drink bourbon in the parlor, actively avoiding the chaos of the caterers moving through the kitchen. He preferred to reap the benefits of his mother's social standing without contributing any actual effort to maintain it. I stepped through the front door. Victoria intercepted me in the grand foyer before I could even set down my keys. She held a large rectangular box wrapped in expensive silver paper. Madeline stood 2 steps behind her, holding a crystal wine glass, a practiced smirk playing on her lips. Victoria presented the box with a grand, sweeping gesture. "I bought this for you today, Audrey," Victoria announced. Her voice carried the bright, artificial pitch she reserved for public acts of charity. "I want you to wear it to the gala on Saturday. We have a very specific aesthetic we are aiming for, and I thought it best to take the guesswork out of your wardrobe." I untied the silver ribbon. I lifted the lid. Inside lay a garment the color of stale mustard. I lifted the dress from the white tissue paper. The fabric snagged roughly against my cuticles. It was a cheap synthetic polyester blend, stiff and entirely unyielding. The cut was intentionally shapeless, featuring a high ruffled neckline that looked like a Victorian costume discarded from a local community theater. The stitching was uneven and the synthetic material carried a faint chemical odor. It was a garment designed to humble the wearer. "It is perfect for you," Victoria stated. She reached out and patted my arm, her rings catching the chandelier light. "We want you to look like you belong in the background, dear. You have such a vital role, keeping the logistics running smoothly behind the scenes. We certainly do not want you trying to outshine Madeline. The photographers will be focusing on the core family, and this color will ensure you do not pull focus." I shifted my gaze to Preston. He had wandered into the foyer, the ice clinking softly in his low ball glass. He looked at the mustard yellow dress. He heard his mother explicitly tell his wife to fade into the background. He took a slow sip of his bourbon, offered a tight, complacent nod of agreement, and looked away. He abandoned me to the wolves to keep his own comfortable spot by the fire. I ran my thumb over the rough polyester. The material felt like a physical manifestation of their disdain. They did not just want me to be poor, they wanted me to look poor so they could feel wealthy by comparison. They needed a visual representation of their perceived superiority. I folded the garment neatly and placed it back in the silver box. "Thank you, Victoria," I said. My voice was calm, smooth, and entirely devoid of sarcasm. "It is very thoughtful." We moved into the formal dining room for the rehearsal dinner. The caterers served roasted duck with a cherry reduction and steamed asparagus. Richard Caldwell sat at the head of the long mahogany table, carving the meat with aggressive theatrical precision. He poured expensive imported red wine into crystal goblets, a vintage he undoubtedly purchased using the money Preston had siphoned from my salary. Richard was performing. He directed his boasts toward Madeline's fiancé, a junior hedge fund manager who measured human worth by the size of a quarterly dividend. "The commercial real estate market is softening," Richard declared, waving his silver fork to emphasize his point. "But smart money diversifies. You have to pivot to secure government revenue streams. That is where the real legacy is built. Federal money is reliable money." He took a heavy swallow of wine. His face was flushed, the capillaries in his cheeks dilated from alcohol and mounting stress. Beneath his confident bluster, I observed the micro-expressions of a man backed into a corner. His knuckles were white where he gripped the stem of his wineglass. "In fact, we are finalizing a government logistics contract next week," Richard boasted. He leaned forward, projecting the image of a titan conquering a new industry. "It is a highly lucrative defense deal. We will be providing secured warehousing for unclassified federal assets. It is a long-term play. The payout will secure our liquidity for the next decade. The Caldwell firm is moving into the big leagues." Preston raised his glass in an enthusiastic toast. Madeline beamed at her father, oblivious to the financial ruin looming over their estate. The table hummed with the self-congratulatory warmth of people who believe their own lies. I picked up my water glass. The condensation transferred a chill to my fingertips. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I kept my eyes focused on the rim of the crystal goblet, maintaining a pleasant, attentive expression. I knew exactly which defense contract Richard was referencing. I knew the vendor identification number. I knew the specific terms of the logistics agreement down to the square footage of the warehouse space he was offering. His real estate firm had submitted a bid to store non-classified server racks for our Eastern Seaboard operations. Richard desperately needed the upfront mobilization fee to cover the offshore debt I had uncovered 2 days prior. He believed the deal was a bureaucratic certainty. He believed the government paperwork was simply moving through administrative channels, waiting for a perfunctory stamp of approval from a faceless bureaucrat. What Richard did not know was the internal hierarchy of the intelligence firm contracting his services. He did not understand the chain of command. He had no idea that every third-party vendor agreement involving logistical access to our networks required a final executive authorization. That authorization rested solely with the Vice President of Threat Intelligence. My signature was the only mechanism that could release those federal funds. I held the keys to his salvation, and I was preparing to change the locks. The caterers cleared the dinner plates and brought out small cups of dark espresso. I excused myself to use the powder room, carrying my unassuming tote bag with me. I locked the heavy oak door and leaned against the marble sink. The air in the Caldwell estate always felt thick, heavy with the exhaust of their constant pretending. My encrypted mobile device vibrated against the lining of my bag. I pulled it out. The screen displayed a secure direct message from Marcus Reynolds. The communication protocol indicated a high-priority alert bypassing the standard administrative channels. I unlocked the device and read the text. "We have a mole. An active data exfiltration attempt occurred on the secondary logistics network. We need to lock down the Caldwell contract immediately. Prepare a threat containment briefing for the morning." I read the words a second time, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark marble of the bathroom. The brute force attack I had traced to Richard's home office the previous day had not been an isolated incident of desperate snooping. He was actively attempting to siphon data. The failing real estate broker was trying to steal proprietary intelligence to monetize it, turning a domestic financial crisis into an act of federal espionage. He was likely trying to steal vendor pricing sheets or unclassified schematics to sell to a competitor, hoping for a quick payout to save his estate. Marcus was demanding a lockdown. He wanted the contract frozen and the threat neutralized before the damage spread. I looked at myself in the gilded mirror above the sink. I thought about the mustard-colored polyester dress sitting in a silver box in the foyer. I thought about Preston nodding in agreement as his mother told me to hide in the background. I thought about the $14,000 stolen while I slept to pay for the roasted duck currently sitting in my stomach. They thought I was a charity case. They thought they controlled the board. They had no idea I was the one writing the rules of engagement. I slipped the phone back into my bag. I was now holding the detonator to the Caldwell family legacy, and my thumb was resting firmly on the trigger. The sun had barely breached the horizon when I pulled into the empty parking lot of the Alexandria Country Club. The morning air carried a sharp chill characteristic of early autumn in Northern Virginia. I parked near the service entrance, retrieving a plastic garment bag from the back seat. Inside hung the mustard-yellow polyester dress Victoria had mandated for the occasion. I did not wear it for the setup phase. I wore dark slacks and a tailored blouse, the uniform of a woman preparing for a long strategic shift. The grand ballroom was a cavern of hollow echoes. Florists barked orders from stepladders, draping garlands of white orchids over the balconies. Waitstaff polished silver cutlery at staging stations near the kitchen. I walked through the double doors, holding the heavy leather binder Victoria had forced upon me. My task was to ensure the flawless execution of a party funded by my own stolen income. I found a quiet corner near the catering entrance and began cross-referencing the dietary requests against the master spreadsheet. My mind operated on two distinct tracks. One track monitored gluten allergies and vegan requests for defense lobbyists. The other track calculated the precise legal fallout of the cyber espionage currently being orchestrated by my father-in-law. I moved toward the foyer to inspect the display easels. Victoria had insisted on a hand-lettered seating chart written in gold ink on thick parchment standing at the entrance to guide the elite to their designated tables. I reviewed the final arrangement to verify the caterers knew where to deliver the specialized meals. The layout was a masterclass in social hierarchy. Table 1 sat directly in front of the stage reserved for Richard Victoria Madeline and her hedge fund fiancé. The surrounding tables held federal judges, senators, and the chief executive officers of various contracting firms. I traced my finger down the alphabetical list, searching for my own name. It was absent from the primary family tables. It was absent from the secondary tier of close friends and business associates. I found my name at the very bottom of the parchment, Audrey Beatrice, Table 28. I stepped back and surveyed the ballroom floor. Table 28 was tucked into the darkest corner of the room. It sat adjacent to the swinging metal doors of the service kitchen, a high-traffic zone where waiters would dump dirty plates and argue over dropped flatware. The chairs were positioned behind a fixed structural pillar obscuring any view of the main stage. The other names assigned to Table 28 included the event photographer, a junior lighting technician, and the +1 of a distant cousin. Victoria had not just separated me from my husband. She had physically banished me to the service quarters. "Excuse me, ma'am," a voice called out. I turned to see a young man in a white catering uniform holding a stack of folded linen napkins. He looked stressed, his forehead slick with sweat. "Are you the event coordinator?" he asked, glancing at the heavy binder in my arms. "The kitchen manager needs to know if we are pushing the cocktail hour back by 15 minutes. The string quartet is running late." He looked at my practical clothes and my clipboard. He assumed I was hired help. In the context of this room, I was. I offered him a serene, untroubled smile. The cocktail hour will proceed exactly on schedule, I instructed. Have the staff begin passing the hors d'oeuvres at 6 o'clock sharp, regardless of the musicians. And please ensure table 28 has an extra pitcher of ice water. He nodded quickly and scurried back through the metal doors. I reached forward and adjusted a slightly crooked place card on a nearby table, and my pulse steady, my hands perfectly still. I did not feel humiliated. Humiliation requires a baseline level of respect for the person inflicting the insult. I only felt a cold, clinical validation of my entire strategy. An hour later, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open. Preston strolled in, holding a cardboard tray carrying 2 artisanal coffees. He wore tailored khakis and a casual cashmere sweater, looking fresh and untroubled. He handed me a coffee, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing behind my eyes. "The place looks incredible," he remarked, scanning the towering floral arrangements. "Mom is going to be thrilled. You really pulled this together, Odds." He walked over to the golden seating chart on the easel. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes skimming the names. I watched his posture shift. His shoulders tensed. He found his own name at table 1, then his gaze drifted downward, searching for his wife. He found me at the bottom of the board. He lowered his coffee cup. He looked at the seating chart, then turned to look at the physical location of table 28 hidden behind the pillar and the kitchen doors. He knew exactly what the placement meant. In his world, seating was a weapon. Preston walked back over to me. He scratched the back of his neck, a classic self-soothing gesture deployed when a subject is experiencing acute cognitive dissonance. "Hey," Preston started, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I saw the board. Mom just wanted the core family at the front. Odds. The photographers need clean shots of the main group for the society pages. Please do not make a big deal out of it. It is just dinner." He did not offer to move his seat. He did not threaten to confront his mother. He did not defend his wife. He simply ordered me to accept the disrespect to ensure his own evening remained comfortable. I looked at the man I had promised to build a life with. The facade was gone. The betrayal was total and undeniable. Preston had chosen his side, and it was not mine. He preferred the illusion of his mother's bankrupt empire over the reality of a loyal partnership. "I am not making a big deal out of it, Preston," I replied, my voice smooth and devoid of friction. "I think table 28 is exactly where I belong tonight." He exhaled a long breath, visibly relieved by my easy capitulation. "Thank you, honey. You are the best. I have to go pick up the tuxedo rentals. I will see you back at the house." He leaned in to kiss my cheek. I turned my head a fraction of an inch, letting his lips brush the air near my jawline. He did not notice the evasion. He turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving me to manage the wreckage of his family's vanity. I waited until the heavy doors closed behind him. Then I excused myself from the ballroom floor and walked down the long carpeted corridor to the country club restrooms. The ladies' room was an opulent sanctuary of imported marble gold fixtures and oversized mirrors. I walked into the furthest stall, locked the heavy wooden door, and pulled my encrypted mobile device from my tote bag. The screen was dark, but a distinct rhythmic vibration pulsed against my palm. This was not a standard notification. It was a secure priority alert protocol, bypassing the standard cellular networks through an encrypted tunnel. I authenticated my credentials using a biometric scan. The screen illuminated, displaying a secure text channel. The sender was Marcus Reynolds. "The situation has escalated. The data leak is active. Richard Caldwell is moving fast." My eyes scanned the incoming lines of text. Marcus typed with the rapid, clipped cadence of a man managing a crisis. "The threat monitors caught a secondary intrusion," Marcus wrote. "Richard is not just probing the perimeter anymore. He is attempting to bypass the secondary firewall on the unclassified logistics server. Furthermore, he is leveraging his political contacts. He just submitted an expedited request to push the fraudulent warehousing contract through procurement this afternoon." I stared at the glowing screen, the harsh light reflecting off the marble walls of the stall. Richard was desperate. The offshore debt was likely calling due. He knew his real estate firm was insolvent, and he needed the federal mobilization fee to cover the gap before his creditors dismantled his life. He was pushing the paperwork demanding an immediate payout, all while actively exploiting the digital backdoor his vendor status provided. "The executive board wants to sever the connection now," Marcus continued. "They want to freeze his vendor access and dispatch federal investigators to his residence." If Marcus initiated a federal raid this afternoon, the authorities would arrest Richard in his home. The gala would be canceled. The financial crimes would be handled quietly in a courtroom, hidden behind sealed indictments and legal maneuvering. Victoria would play the victim, claiming ignorance. Preston would undoubtedly expect me to empty my private trust to pay for his father's defense attorneys. The Caldwells would find a way to manipulate the narrative, preserving their social standing while dragging me into their legal nightmare. I could not allow them to dictate the terms of their own destruction. The ambush required an audience. The poison had to be drawn out in public under the crystal chandeliers in front of the senators and judges they had sacrificed my dignity to impress. I placed my fingers over the digital keyboard. I formulated my response, ensuring the syntax was precise and the authority unmistakable. I was no longer speaking as a daughter-in-law, navigating a toxic family dynamic. I was issuing a directive as the Vice President of Threat Intelligence. "Do not deploy federal agents to his residence," I typed. "A premature raid will trigger his fail-safes and we risk losing the offshore financial logs. I have physical proximity to the target. I will sever the connection manually to ensure total containment." The secure channel showed Marcus reading the message. A tense silence stretched across the encrypted network. "You are requesting operational control of a federal security breach," Marcus replied. "This is highly irregular, Vice President." "The target is currently preparing to host a major social event," I responded, my thumbs moving rhythmically across the glass screen. "He is distracted and overly confident. If we strike during the gala, his digital defenses will be unguarded and we can seize the entire corporate network without resistance. I need a tactical delay to secure the evidence." Another pause. The marble walls of the restroom felt cold against my shoulders. "How much time do you need?" Marcus asked. I checked the gold watch on my wrist. The caterers were setting the tables. The string quartet was tuning their instruments. Victoria was likely having her hair styled, practicing her condescending jokes for the microphone. "Give me until 8 p.m. I'll handle the threat in person." The sun dipped below the Virginia tree line, taking the natural light with it and leaving the Alexandria Country Club bathed in the artificial glow of crystal chandeliers. Guests began to arrive, filtering through the grand foyer in a steady stream of tailored silk and dark wool. These were the architects of the federal ecosystem. They were defense lobbyists, senior senators, and heirs to old money fortunes who treated national politics like a private recreational sport. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne, navigating a room where every handshake was a transaction and every smile concealed a hidden agenda. I stood precisely where Victoria had assigned me. I occupied the shadows near the swinging metal doors of the kitchen, draped in the stiff, mustard-yellow polyester dress she had forced upon me. The synthetic fabric scratched against my skin, a constant tactile reminder of my designated place in their hierarchy. But from this marginalized vantage point, I possessed an unobstructed view of the entire ballroom. I did not watch the party like a neglected wife. I observed the room like a threat analyst, monitoring a hostile environment. Richard and Victoria Caldwell paraded through the crowd. They performed the roles of wealthy benefactors with practiced grace. Victoria kissed cheeks and complimented diamond necklaces, her laughter ringing out clear and hollow over the soft music of the string quartet. Richard clapped men on the back, offering broad smiles and booming greetings. To the untrained eye, they were the pinnacle of high society success. My training allowed me to see the fractures beneath the polish. Richard inherited his commercial real estate firm from his father. He grew up believing his surname provided an impenetrable shield against failure. He possessed a profound talent for spending money, but lacked the operational discipline required to generate it. Now the weight of his concealed offshore debt was crushing him. I tracked his movements across the polished hardwood floor. He cornered a man near the ice sculpture. I recognized the target immediately. He was a federal acquisition officer, a mid-level bureaucrat who processed vendor logistics contracts for the Department of Defense. Richard invaded the man's personal space, gripping his elbow with a tension that betrayed severe panic. The acquisition officer shifted uncomfortably, attempting to step back, but Richard advanced, speaking in rapid, urgent bursts. I watched Richard wipe a layer of sweat from his forehead with a linen handkerchief. His eyes darted around the room, frantic and unfocused. He was pushing the officer for an update on the warehousing agreement. He needed the mobilization fee to satisfy the offshore creditors who were undoubtedly threatening his physical assets. The irony was a bitter pill. Richard was pleading with a minor government employee to expedite a contract that I alone had the authority to approve. He was begging for a lifeline while I held the anchor. Preston sat at the head table, sipping his bourbon and checking his phone. He looked entirely detached from the desperation radiating from his father. Preston spent his entire life choosing the path of least resistance. When faced with the choice between defending his wife or pacifying his mother, he chose the quiet cowardice of compliance. He assumed his family would always provide a safety net, remaining willfully ignorant of the fact that the net had rotted away years ago. A sharp scent of expensive perfume interrupted my assessment. Madeline strutted toward the kitchen doors, a crystal glass of deep red Cabernet Sauvignon balanced in her hand. Her junior hedge fund fiancé trailed closely behind her, wearing a smug expression that perfectly matched his expensive tuxedo. Madeline had been raised to weaponize social etiquette. She never experienced a consequence she could not buy her way out of, and she viewed my presence as a personal insult to her pedigree. "Audrey," Madeline said. Her voice was loud enough to draw the attention of a nearby senator. "Are you hiding back here with the catering staff, I suppose? It makes sense. You really do blend right in with the help." She stopped mere inches from me. With a casual, deliberate flick of her wrist, she tilted her crystal glass. A dark, crimson drop of wine splashed directly onto the hem of my yellow dress. The liquid instantly absorbed into the cheap polyester, spreading into an ugly, undeniable stain. Madeline gasped, pressing her free hand to her chest in a theatrical display of shock. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry. My hand just slipped. Although I suppose that dress could not possibly look any worse anyway." Her fiancé released a short, cruel chuckle. He looked at me, waiting for the expected reaction. They wanted me to flush with embarrassment. They wanted me to flee to the restroom in tears, validating their power to break me. I did not break eye contact with Madeline. I did not raise my voice. I signaled a passing waiter and requested a clean linen napkin and a glass of club soda. "It is fine, Madeline," I replied. My tone was smooth, carrying the steady cadence of a woman explaining a simple concept to a difficult child. "Stains always reveal themselves eventually. You just have to know how to wash them out." I dabbed the hem of my dress with the damp cloth. Madeline frowned, her features tightening in frustration. My refusal to surrender the emotional reaction she craved unsettled her. She turned on her heel and marched back toward the head table, her fiancé hurrying to keep pace. I discarded the stained napkin on a nearby serving tray. I checked my gold watch. The time was reading 7:55 in the evening. The operational window was closing. The guests were finishing their salads, the clatter of silverware softening as the waitstaff cleared the porcelain plates. The string quartet concluded their set, the final notes hanging in the cool air of the ballroom. Victoria stepped onto the raised platform at the front of the room. The spotlight illuminated her tailored gown. She raised her champagne flute and struck the rim with a silver spoon. The sharp, clear chimes sliced through the ambient noise, commanding immediate silence. 200 faces turned toward the stage. The speeches were about to commence. This was the moment she would crown herself the queen of her crumbling empire. I reached into my unassuming tote bag. My fingers bypassed a spare tube of lipstick and located the cold metallic chassis of my encrypted tablet. I withdrew the device, holding it shielded against my torso. The screen remained dark until I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The system verified my fingerprint, authenticated my security clearance, and granted me administrative access to the threat intelligence mainframe. The interface loaded instantly. I bypassed the standard employee portals and accessed the restricted federal vendor directory. I located the corporate file for Caldwell Commercial Holdings. The red alert banner was still active on the account, indicating Richard was continuing his frantic attempts to bypass the secondary firewall to steal proprietary data. He was actively committing cyber espionage while sipping wine 20 yards away from me. I pulled up the contract authorization protocol. I possessed the final signature authority to release his funding or terminate his vendor status. I opened a secondary window accessing the financial lockdown sequence designed to sever all domestic and offshore connections to a compromised contractor. Victoria smiled at her audience. She adjusted the microphone, preparing to deliver a speech built on stolen funds and fabricated prestige. I tapped the execution command on my screen. The digital guillotine dropped. I permanently severed Richard's contract, flagged his company for federal investigation, and initiated an immediate freeze on all connected corporate assets. The threat was contained. The trap was locked. I slipped the tablet back into my bag and waited for the impact. Victoria adjusted the silver stem of the microphone stand. A brief, sharp frequency squeal echoed through the sound system before the audio engineer quickly smoothed the levels. She smiled, a radiant, practiced expression honed over decades of charity luncheons and political fundraisers. The ballroom quieted. Waitstaff retreated to the edges of the room, standing at attention, while the guests turned their focus toward the stage. She began her address by acknowledging the architects of her social circle. She thanked the senior senator from Virginia, praising his recent legislative victories with a tone of familiar intimacy. She nodded to the federal judges, the chief acquisition officers, and the managing partners of the district's most lucrative defense contracting firms. She wove their names into her narrative effortlessly, treating their attendance as a personal endorsement of the Caldwell family's enduring relevance. Her focus then shifted to her children, painting a portrait of dynastic perfection designed to obscure their crumbling financial reality. She spoke of Madeline highlighting her upcoming wedding to the junior hedge fund manager, framing them as the next generation of the local elite. She praised Preston, inflating his mid-level sales position into an executive triumph. She spun a fiction of prosperity, a carefully constructed illusion designed to conceal the debt eating away at their foundation. Preston smiled, raising his bourbon glass to acknowledge the polite applause. He accepted the unearned praise with the same easy entitlement he used to accept my stolen salary. Then the spotlight seemed to shift, casting its peripheral glow toward the shadows near the service kitchen. Victoria turned her head. Her eyes located my mustard yellow dress. The warmth in her voice dissolved, replaced by a sharp theatrical amusement. "And here is our Audrey," Victoria announced. The acoustics of the ballroom amplified her words, driving them into every corner of the room. "The one who married up. We love our little charity case. It takes a village to teach someone which fork to use." The ballroom erupted. The laughter was a collective, unified sound. It was the polished, conditioned amusement of a ruling class acknowledging the jester. They chuckled into their crystal champagne flutes. They nudged their tablemates, sharing quiet, knowing smirks. They participated in the ritual humiliation because Victoria dictated the social current, and opposing her meant risking their own standing in this fragile ecosystem. I did not retreat. I did not avert my gaze. I stood perfectly still, a quiet anchor in a sea of manufactured ridicule. I looked directly at Preston. He sat at the center of the head table, flanked by floral arrangements that cost more than my first car. He did not rise to defend his wife. He did not object to his mother broadcasting my modest upbringing as a comedic punchline for 200 strangers. He simply swirled the amber liquid in his glass, fixing his stare on the melting ice. His cowardice was total and undeniable. The laughter peaked and began to subside, replaced by a lingering, expectant silence. Victoria waited for me to lower my head. She expected a physical display of submission. She wanted the satisfaction of watching my shoulders slump, proving to the room that she possessed the power to put me in my place. I gave her nothing. I let the silence stretch. I let it grow heavy and uncomfortable. The absence of my reaction created a vacuum in the room, a subtle disruption in the script she had written. Guests shifted in their padded chairs. The string quartet players exchanged uncertain glances, unsure if they should begin playing background music to cover the awkward pause. My focus bypassed Victoria and zeroed in on Richard Caldwell. He sat adjacent to the podium at table 1. While his wife basked in the fading applause, Richard was experiencing a physiological collapse. The climate control in the country club kept the ambient temperature cool, yet a sheen of perspiration coated his forehead. His complexion carried an unhealthy ashen pallor, a stark contrast to the tailored tuxedo he wore. His smartphone rested on the white linen tablecloth next to his dinner plate. The screen illuminated, displaying a rapid cascade of silent notifications. The digital alerts were stacking up faster than he could read them. Automated warnings from his offshore holding companies in the Cayman Islands. Emergency notifications from his primary domestic bank citing frozen accounts. Red flags from the federal procurement portal indicating a suspended vendor status. The financial execution command I initiated moments ago was tearing through his corporate infrastructure with the precision of a surgical strike. I raised my right hand, lifting the encrypted tablet from the shadows of my tote bag. The screen glowed with the stark, unmistakable interface of a restricted federal defense portal. I held the device at chest level, ensuring Richard had a clear, unobstructed line of sight. His eyes darted away from his phone and locked onto me. He saw the tablet. He saw the cold, unyielding calculation in my posture. He realized the woman his wife was currently mocking possessed the security clearance required to view that specific interface. I rested my thumb over the final execution command on the glass screen. The initial sequence had frozen his assets, but this secondary confirmation would broadcast the security breach directly to the Department of Defense, finalizing his permanent vendor exile and initiating the formal criminal inquiry. Richard stopped breathing. His mouth opened slightly, drawing in shallow, frantic breaths. His hands trembled, rattling the silver cutlery resting against his porcelain plate. The titan of commercial real estate was reduced to a terrified spectator, watching the demolition of his own life. He understood in that fraction of a second that the charity case held the detonator to his entire empire. Victoria remained oblivious to the silent execution happening 10 feet away from her. She mistook my stillness for a crushed spirit. Encouraged by her perceived victory, she adjusted her posture and pivoted to the grand finale of her speech. She intended to cement their legacy, projecting an image of untouchable financial security to the exact people they owed money to. "We have always believed that hard work yields the greatest rewards," Victoria declared, her voice swelling with unearned pride. "And the Caldwell legacy is only growing stronger. Next week, Richard will finalize a landmark logistics contract with the defense sector. It is a partnership that will elevate our family operations to unprecedented heights. This achievement will secure the Caldwell legacy for a century, ensuring our children and our grandchildren remain at the forefront of this community." She raised her glass, preparing to offer a final triumphant toast to her own fabricated genius. She inhaled deeply, ready to deliver the concluding sentence of her performance. She smiled at the federal acquisition officer seated nearby, projecting total victory. She never finished the breath. The heavy oak doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding percussive crack, interrupting Victoria mid-sentence. The heavy oak doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom swung inward with a resonating thud. The brass hinges groaned a harsh mechanical sound that severed Victoria's final syllable. The sudden disruption drew 200 faces away from the brightly lit stage and toward the shadowy vestibule. Marcus Reynolds stepped across the threshold. In the insular ecosystem of Northern Virginia, power is rarely announced with fanfare. It is recognized by sight. Marcus was the founder and chief executive officer of the region's most formidable defense intelligence firm. He was a man who briefed congressional oversight committees behind closed doors and determined the allocation of billions in federal cybersecurity spending. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, moving with the unhurried, deliberate stride of someone who dictated the turning of the earth beneath his feet. He did not come alone. 2 men flanked him, their presence instantly changing the atmospheric pressure of the room. They wore dark, nondescript suits and earpieces curled discreetly behind their necks. They possessed the rigid, vigilant posture of federal security officers. Their eyes swept the ballroom, not admiring the floral arrangements, but assessing exits and cataloging potential threats. Their arrival signaled a fundamental shift. This was no longer a country club anniversary celebration. It was a secured operational theater. A profound, suffocating quiet descended upon the guests. The string quartet lowered their bows, waitstaff froze in place holding trays of half-empty glasses. The elite crowd understood the hierarchy of their own world. Senators and federal judges wielded influence, but Marcus Reynolds commanded the actual infrastructure of national security. He was not on the guest list. His uninvited arrival was a calculated breach of social protocol, an intentional signal that the rules of the evening had been permanently suspended. At Table 1, Richard Caldwell experienced a catastrophic miscalculation. Richard saw the chief executive officer of the exact defense firm he was attempting to defraud walk into his party. The panic that had seized him moments earlier morphed into a desperate, frantic delusion. Richard believed his frantic phone calls and political maneuvering earlier that afternoon had somehow escalated his logistics contract to the executive desk. He thought Marcus had come to finalize the deal, to grace the Caldwell Anniversary Gala with a display of corporate partnership. The drowning man saw an incoming predator and mistook it for a rescue vessel. Richard abandoned his seat. He knocked his knees against the heavy table, rattling the fine china and spilling a glass of water across the white linen. He did not bother to apologize to his wealthy tablemates. He scrambled across the polished hardwood floor, his tailored tuxedo jacket flapping open. Sweat gathered at his temples and stained the stiff white collar of his dress shirt. He intercepted Marcus near the center of the ballroom, stepping directly into the executive's path. Richard extended his right hand, his palm damp his chest, heaving with exertion and manufactured enthusiasm. "Marcus!" Richard called out. His voice was a loud, breathless projection intended to ensure every senator and lobbyist in the room heard the familiarity in his greeting. "What an unexpected honor! We had no idea you were coming. Please come join the family table. We have a seat waiting right at the front." Richard stood there, his hand extended, offering a seat at the epicenter of a fabricated empire. Marcus did not break his stride. He did not slow his pace. He did not even turn his head to acknowledge the outstretched hand. He walked straight past Richard as if the man were a piece of misplaced furniture. The federal security officers moved in flawless synchronization, stepping smoothly around the stunned real estate broker, leaving Richard stranded in the center of the ballroom with his hand grasping empty air. The public dismissal was absolute. It was a social execution, performed without a single word. The guests watched in silent fascination as Marcus continued his path. He bypassed the senators who were already rising from their chairs to greet him. He bypassed the federal judges. He walked directly past Victoria, who remained frozen on the raised platform, her fingers gripping the microphone stand tight enough to turn her knuckles white. Her painted smile had collapsed into a mask of total bewilderment. Marcus was not heading toward the lights. He was heading into the shadows. The crowd parted for him, leaning away from the federal officers. The trajectory of his approach became undeniable. He was walking toward the swinging metal doors of the catering kitchen. He was walking toward table 28. He stopped squarely in front of me. I remained standing in the dim light, my posture straight, the encrypted tablet held securely in my right hand. Marcus stopped less than 2 feet away. He did not look at the kitchen doors. He did not look at the catering staff huddled nervously in the corner. His sharp gaze dropped to the fabric of my dress. He registered the stiff mustard yellow polyester and the dark blooming stain of red wine near the hem. He understood the visual language of the garment immediately. He knew the tactical purpose behind the ugly color and the cheap cut. He saw the physical evidence of the humiliation the Caldwell family had attempted to inflict upon me. Then his eyes shifted to the glowing screen of the restricted defense portal in my hand. He saw the execution command waiting for my final biometric confirmation. Marcus raised his right hand. He did not offer it to the senators, and he had ignored the patriarch of the Caldwell family. He extended his hand directly to me. I placed my hand in his. The grip was firm, an acknowledgement of equal standing within a covert battlefield. "Audrey," Marcus said. He did not lower his volume. He spoke with the crisp, resonant projection of a commander delivering a briefing. The acoustics of the silent ballroom caught his words and carried them effortlessly across the tables, echoing off the crystal chandeliers and the imported floral arrangements. "Sorry I am late, Vice President," Marcus announced. The title landed in the center of the room like a physical blow. The silence shattered, replaced by a low, rushing wave of shock rolling through the assembled guests. "The Pentagon needs your final authorization to sever the Caldwell contract," Marcus continued, maintaining unbroken eye contact with me. "The digital perimeter is locked, but they require the Vice President of Threat Intelligence to execute the termination." A collective gasp sucked the remaining oxygen out of the ballroom. It was a visceral, involuntary reaction from 200 members of the regional elite. The sound was a mixture of horror and sudden, terrifying clarity. The lobbyist who had chuckled at Victoria's joke spilled his drink. The senator who had applauded the charity case comment gripped the edge of his table. They looked at the woman in the cheap yellow dress. They processed the words spoken by the most powerful chief executive in their industry. They realized the girl banished to the kitchen doors was not a low-level desk worker. She was the vice president of threat intelligence. She was the apex predator of their digital ecosystem, and she held the authority to dismantle the very foundation of the family hosting the gala. Preston sat frozen at the head table. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. He realized the quiet, obedient wife he had stolen from was actually a phantom, a woman who analyzed deception for a living and who had just cornered his entire family with terrifying precision. Richard remained stranded in the middle of the floor, his extended hand slowly dropping to his side. His breath hitched in his chest as the reality of the phrase, "sever the Caldwell contract," echoed in his ears. The rescue vessel was not a rescue vessel. It was a warship, and it had arrived to sink his estate. I withdrew my hand from Marcus. I looked out over the sea of stunned faces. I looked at Victoria still trapped on the stage, the microphone broadcasting her panicked, ragged breathing to the entire country club. I had absorbed their insults, documented their thefts, and endured their condescension. The preparation phase was over. The execution phase had begun. The echo of Marcus Reynolds delivering my title settled over the Alexandria Country Club like a heavy winter frost. The sheer impossibility of the statement paralyzed the room. The regional elite individuals who spent their entire lives calibrating the exact social weight of every person they encountered suddenly found their internal compasses shattered. I was no longer the invisible wife standing near the kitchen doors. I was a structural pillar of their professional world, and I was standing on their blind side. Richard Caldwell took a faltering step toward me. The artificial confidence that usually held his posture together evaporated, leaving a hollow, terrified shell. His physical decline was rapid and visceral, his chest hewed with shallow, irregular breaths. The tailored tuxedo jacket, designed to project authority, now hung on a frame that seemed to shrink under the harsh glare of the crystal chandeliers. He reached out with a trembling right hand, driven by a primal instinct to barter, to negotiate a quiet settlement in the shadows, the way he always had. I did not retreat. I turned to face him, fully squaring my shoulders. I looked at his outstretched hand, the same hand he used to pat the backs of senators while spending my stolen salary. I did not accept the gesture. I let his hand hover in the empty space between us, a stark physical rejection that every guest in the ballroom witnessed. I kept my voice measured and distinct, ensuring my words carried the precise clinical weight of a formal indictment. "Richard, your firm failed its compliance audit at 6 o'clock this evening," I stated. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving a sickly, translucent sheen on his skin. He opened his mouth, attempting to formulate a denial, but his vocal cords refused to cooperate. "You attempted to siphon classified data to cover your insolvency," I continued, holding his panicked gaze. "As Vice President of Threat Intelligence, I have permanently frozen your vendor access." The words struck him with physical force. He stumbled backward, his polished leather shoes slipping against the hardwood floor. He had spent his entire adult life relying on his surname and his country club membership to shield him from consequences. He believed the rules did not apply to his bloodline. He failed to comprehend that cyber intelligence operates on a binary metric. An intrusion is an intrusion, regardless of the pedigree of the perpetrator. I watched the immediate, devastating ripple effect of my declaration wash over the surrounding tables. In the high-powered ecosystem of Northern Virginia, loyalty is a conditional currency valid only as long as a person remains useful or dangerous. A compromised defense contractor is a radioactive liability. Richard turned his head instinctively, looking toward his network of powerful friends for support. He found a sudden, brutal isolation. A prominent federal acquisition officer seated at table 1 stood up and took 2 deliberate steps away from the Caldwell patriarch. The managing partner of a prestigious law firm averted his eyes suddenly, finding the pattern of the tablecloth endlessly fascinating. A senior lobbyist whispered an urgent instruction to his wife, and they both pushed their chairs back, distancing themselves from the blast radius. The famous Caldwell Church handshake, the cornerstone of Richard's social empire, withered and died in front of my eyes. No one would risk their security clearance or their political capital to associate with a man publicly accused of federal cyber espionage. The invisible quarantine line was drawn, and Richard was trapped, alone, on the wrong side of it. On the elevated stage, Victoria could not process the rapid dismantling of her reality. Her brain rejected the sensory input. She had spent 35 years curating an image of supreme dominance, and she refused to surrender the narrative to the woman wearing the cheap polyester dress. She gripped the silver microphone stand with both hands, her knuckles stark white against the metal. The sound system amplified her erratic breathing, broadcasting her rising panic to the silent crowd. "Vice President," Victoria stammered, her voice shrill and unhinged. The microphone screeched in protest as she leaned too close to the receiver. "Audrey is she is a secretary." She clung to her fabricated insult, desperate to enforce her version of the truth upon a room that had already recognized the new power dynamic. She wanted the guests to laugh again. She wanted the elite to join her in dismissing me. But the guests remained silent, their eyes darting nervously between the panicked matriarch on the stage and the unbothered executive flanked by federal security officers. Marcus turned his head, directing his focus toward the stage. He did not raise his voice, yet his words commanded absolute obedience. His tone was forged from cold, unforgiving steel. "Audrey Beatrice is the highest-ranking cyber intelligence officer in this state," Victoria Marcus declared. "She holds the keys to the kingdom." The finality of his statement extinguished Victoria's resistance. Her jaw went slack. The microphone slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the wooden platform with a dull, heavy thud that resonated through the ballroom speakers. The sharp noise caused several guests to flinch, but Victoria remained frozen, staring at me with a hollow, uncomprehending terror. I did not gloat. I did not offer a victorious smile or a triumphant remark. Gloating implies a contest, a struggle between equals. This was not a contest. This was a systematic containment of a hostile threat. I possessed the leverage, the evidence, and the authority. My vengeance did not require a dramatic speech. It only required a single, precise action. I looked down at the encrypted tablet resting in my hand. The restricted Federal Defense interface glowed against the dim lighting of the catering alcove. The execution command pulsed on the glass screen, awaiting my final biometric authorization. I pressed my thumb against the optical scanner. The system verified my identity in a fraction of a second. A green confirmation banner materialized across the display. The digital command traversed the encrypted network, finalizing the termination of Caldwell Commercial Holdings. The action permanently severed Richard from the federal logistics grid, locked his corporate accounts, and transmitted a comprehensive data packet to the federal investigative authorities. The freeze was executed. I lowered the tablet, sliding it seamlessly back into my unassuming tote bag. The realization hit the crowd with the crushing weight of a tidal wave. The guests looked at Richard shivering in his tailored tuxedo, abandoned by his peers and facing imminent federal prosecution. They looked at Victoria standing mute and defeated on a stage funded by stolen money. Then their eyes shifted back to me. The social hierarchy of the room inverted in a matter of minutes. The family, who had spent the entire evening mocking the poor wife who had isolated me by the kitchen doors and laughed at my practical shoes, was officially ruined. Their legacy was exposed as a fraudulent house of cards, and they were left standing in the wreckage. The elite crowd understood the brutal poetry of the moment. They stared at me, their previous condescension replaced by a profound, terrifying respect. The charity case was the architect of their destruction, and I was the one holding the axe. The federal execution of Richard Caldwell was a matter of national security. It was a sterile digital process concluded with a single biometric scan. But the corporate destruction was only half of the equation. The cyber espionage neutralized his future, yet it did not address the history of personal betrayal inflicted upon me. The social humiliation, the stolen wages, and the endless condescension required a different kind of reckoning. I turned my attention away from the ruined patriarch. I focused on the woman still standing on the elevated platform. Victoria appeared physically diminished. The spotlight that had illuminated her triumphs just moments ago now exposed the deep lines of panic etching her face. She looked down at me, her eyes darting between Marcus Reynolds and the synthetic fabric she had forced me to wear. She still could not reconcile the obedient daughter-in-law she had bullied with the executive officer who had just seized her empire. I stepped forward. I left the shadows of the kitchen doors behind and walked onto the polished hardwood of the main ballroom floor. The crowd parted for me. Federal judges and prominent lobbyists stepped backward, clearing a wide path toward the head table. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic click of my practical shoes against the wood. I carried my sensible canvas tote bag over my shoulder. It was the same bag Madeline had mocked during the rehearsal dinner. I reached the center of the room, stopping directly in front of table 1. Victoria stepped down from the stage, her high heels clicking unevenly against the wooden stairs. She moved toward her family, seeking safety among her children, but she found only frozen, terrified silence. Richard was still gasping for air near the podium. Preston sat rigid in his chair, staring at me with hollow eyes. I reached into the canvas bag. My fingers bypassed the encrypted tablet and grasped a thick physical object. I pulled out a pristine black leather binder. It was not a digital file hidden behind a corporate firewall. It was a hard copy, a physical manifestation of their sins printed on high-quality paper. I had compiled it meticulously over the past 3 weeks, applying the same forensic rigor I used to track foreign adversaries. I looked at Victoria. Her breath hitched in her throat. She recognized the shape of a financial ledger. "Family does not keep score, Victoria," I said. My voice was quiet, yet it carried the sharp edge of freshly cut glass. "But accountants do." I dropped the heavy binder onto the white linen tablecloth of table 1. The impact produced a dull, definitive thud that resonated through the quiet ballroom. The leather cover flipped open, revealing hundreds of pages, separated by colored tabs. The documents included highlighted bank statements, county tax records, and vendor invoices. I did not need to raise my voice. The acoustics of the stunned room ensured every syllable I spoke landed with perfect clarity. "That ledger contains the true accounting of the Caldwell legacy," I explained, maintaining unbroken eye contact with the matriarch. "It details the $14,000 Preston stole from my salary in the middle of the night to pay for your imported champagne. It chronicles the secondary and tertiary mortgages you took out against this estate just to maintain the illusion of solvency. And it includes the overdue balance notices from the very vendors serving your guests tonight." A sharp intake of breath came from my right. The young man in the white catering uniform, the same junior staff member who had earlier assumed I was the event coordinator, was standing near the table. He carried a silver water pitcher. His eyes fell upon the open binder. He possessed the practical intelligence of a working-class professional. He saw the highlighted vendor invoices and the corresponding bank denials stamped across the top pages. He set the water pitcher down on the nearest surface. He leaned forward, reading the text. The realization washed over his face, replacing his professional deference with raw, simmering anger. He looked at Victoria, then at the elaborate floral arrangements and the plates of roasted tenderloin. He understood the math instantly. The Caldwells could not pay for the event. The catering staff, the florists, and the musicians were providing their intense physical labor to a bankrupt family. The junior caterer did not cause a scene, but he turned and walked swiftly toward the kitchen doors. I watched him intercept the floor manager. Brief, hushed words were exchanged. The news spread through the service staff like a brush fire. Waiters stopped clearing plates. Bartenders ceased pouring expensive liquor. The working-class backbone of the gala effectively went on strike, realizing their paychecks were a fiction built on fraudulent promises. At the head table, the social collapse continued. Madeline sat frozen in her designer silk gown, her manicured hands trembling in her lap. Beside her sat her fiancé, the junior hedge fund manager. He was a man who evaluated human beings based on their asset portfolios and market viability. He leaned over the white tablecloth, his eyes scanning the exposed financial documents. He read the property tax defaults. He saw the staggering ratios of leveraged debt. He processed the objective truth of the Caldwell estate. They were not old money. They were a toxic asset wrapped in a polite smile. I watched his features contort. The polite, indulgent expression he usually reserved for his future bride twisted into a mask of unvarnished disgust. He physically recoiled, pulling his chair several inches away from Madeline. In his world, marrying into hidden debt was the ultimate cardinal sin. It was a liability that could infect his own career and alienate his high-net-worth investors. He looked at Madeline not with love, but with the cold, calculating regret of a man who had almost purchased a worthless stock. Madeline reached out to touch his arm, a desperate, silent plea for solidarity. He pulled his arm away before her fingers could make contact. The golden child of Northern Virginia lost her future in a matter of seconds. The prestigious wedding she had spent her life planning evaporated into the cool, conditioned air. She was suddenly just a girl with a ruined surname and a closet full of unpaid dresses. Victoria watched her daughter's relationship disintegrate. The matriarch clutched her pearl necklace, her chest heaving with erratic breaths. She looked around the ballroom, searching the faces of her peers for a single shred of sympathy. She found nothing but averted eyes and grim, unforgiving expressions. The elite crowd recoiled from the stench of financial ruin. The illusion of the Caldwell legacy was systematically dismantled in front of the exact people they had spent their entire lives trying to impress. They were exposed as frauds, grifters dressed in designer clothing, begging for relevance on borrowed time. I directed my focus back to Victoria. I needed her to understand the absolute permanence of her situation. I needed her to know that her manipulation tactics held zero currency in the real world. "You assumed my silence was a sign of weakness?" I told her, my tone steady and conversational. "You thought you could dress me in cheap synthetic fabric and hide me by the kitchen doors while you spent my money to buy the affection of strangers. You believed you controlled the narrative because you controlled the guest list." Victoria opened her mouth, a weak, desperate sound escaping her throat. She had no retorts left. The script she had rehearsed for this evening was burning to ash on the table in front of her. "I do not play social games, Victoria," I said. "I handle active threats. When I discovered the unauthorized transfer from my account, I did not cry to my husband. I documented the theft, I secured my assets, and yesterday morning, I filed formal fraud charges with my financial institution and the local authorities regarding the stolen funds." The finality of the statement drove the last nail into the coffin. I had not merely exposed their secret, I had criminalized their survival tactic. Preston's late-night wire transfer was no longer a domestic dispute over a joint checking account. It was a documented case of financial fraud sitting on the desk of a federal investigator. I had weaponized their own greed against them, turning their desperate theft into the instrument of their legal demise. I stood in the center of the silent ballroom, the mustard yellow dress serving as a vibrant, ironic flag of victory. I had fulfilled every requirement of my covert profession. I identified the hostile actors, I mapped their vulnerabilities, and I neutralized their ability to inflict further harm. The corporate execution was complete. The financial unveiling was finished. The only variable remaining was the man who had promised to protect me, the husband who had traded his integrity for a seat at a crumbling table. The corporate execution neutralized Richard. The financial unveiling dismantled Victoria. But the deepest fracture, the one that required a personal surgical closure, belonged to the man seated at the center of the head table. Preston had spent the entire evening and the entirety of our marriage occupying the comfortable middle ground. He was a man who navigated life by avoiding friction. He married me because my self-sufficiency demanded nothing of him. He allowed his family to tear me down because defending me required an effort he was unwilling to expend. He enjoyed the quiet stability of my paycheck and the loud prestige of his surname, believing he would never have to choose between the two. Now, the middle ground was gone. The earth had split open beneath his feet, leaving him stranded on an island of his own cowardice. Preston pushed his chair back. The wooden legs scraped harshly against the polished floor, a jagged sound that cut through the frozen silence of the ballroom. He stood up. The easy, charismatic smile he used to close sales deals and charm country club bartenders was missing. In its place was a naked, unvarnished panic. He realized the quiet woman he had taken for granted was walking away, and she was taking his only remaining lifeline with her. He rushed forward, navigating the narrow space between the front tables. He moved with a frantic, uncoordinated energy, desperate to bridge the physical distance I had established. He reached out his fingers, extended, intending to grab my arm and pull me back into his sphere of influence. It was the physical manifestation of his entitlement. He assumed he still possessed the right to touch me, to soothe me, with the pacifying gestures that used to work in our kitchen. I stepped back. The movement was slight, perhaps a single inch, but the boundary it drew was definitive. His hand grasped empty air. He let his arm drop to his side, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon rather than crossed a ballroom. "Audrey, wait, honey," Preston pleaded. His voice trembled, lacking the smooth cadence he typically relied upon. "Please, we can fix this. We can sit down and talk about all of this. We are a team." I looked at him. I examined the man I had promised to build a future with. I saw the expensive cashmere sweater, the tailored trousers, the polished loafers. I saw a hollow shell, constructed from stolen funds and inherited arrogance. Then my gaze drifted downward. I looked at the stiff synthetic fabric of the mustard yellow dress Victoria had forced me to wear. I focused on the dark, blooming stain of red wine near the hem, the deliberate sabotage Madeline had inflicted just an hour ago. For years I had absorbed their slights. I had worn their insults like a uniform, believing my tolerance was an act of love. I thought absorbing the blows protected our marriage. I failed to realize that every time I turned the other cheek, Preston merely handed them another weapon. The wine stain was the final physical symbol of the disrespect I had tolerated to keep him comfortable. "We were never a team, Preston," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and devoid of the emotional friction he was desperate to spark. The words landed with the weight of a gavel. Preston flinched. He shook his head in rapid, frantic denial. He needed me to be angry. Anger implies a lingering attachment, a passion that can be negotiated and manipulated. My cold, clinical detachment terrified him because it signaled an irreversible conclusion. "Audrey, you know that is not true," Preston countered, shifting instantly into his practiced victim routine. He lowered his voice, attempting to create an intimate bubble amidst the public spectacle. "I only transferred that money to keep the peace. You know how Victoria gets when things do not go her way. She would have made our lives miserable if the gala was canceled. I was just trying to manage her. I was protecting you from her wrath. I did it for us." It was a masterful display of gaslighting. He attempted to reframe a covert theft as an act of selfless heroism. He wanted me to view him as a martyr who fell on his sword to shield me from his mother's demands. He relied on the assumption that my affection would blind me to the logical inconsistencies in his narrative. I did not raise my voice, but I ensured my enunciation was flawless. I dismantled his defense with the precision of an analyst deconstructing a flawed algorithm. "You did not protect me, Preston," I stated, holding his panicked stare. "You protected your own comfort. You waited until I was asleep to drain the bank account I built. When Victoria handed me this cheap synthetic dress and told me to fade into the background, you nodded in agreement. When she banished me to the kitchen doors and mocked my upbringing in front of 200 people, you stared at your bourbon and let the room laugh." Preston opened his mouth to interrupt, to offer another hollow justification, but I did not yield the floor. "You call your behavior keeping the peace?" I continued, stripping away the final layers of his delusion. "But your silence was not peace. Your silence was compliance. You watched them humiliate me and you chose your inheritance over your wife. Only there is no inheritance left. You traded a loyal partner for a bankrupt facade, and now you have neither." The undeniable truth of the statement paralyzed him. He had no counter-argument. The financial ledger sitting on the head table proved his family was destitute. The federal security officers standing near Marcus Reynolds proved his father was facing imminent prosecution. The life he thought he was preserving had already burned to the ground. He was a prince without a kingdom, begging a woman he had betrayed to save him from the ashes. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face for a trace of hesitation, a flicker of the accommodating girl he thought he had married. He found a woman who had meticulously mapped his exit. "I am sorry," Preston whispered. It was a fragile, broken sound, the last gasp of a man who realized he had miscalculated the odds. "Apologies only matter when they precede the damage," I replied. I raised my left hand. The diamond engagement ring and the simple platinum wedding band caught the ambient light of the crystal chandeliers. When Preston placed those rings on my finger, I viewed them as a solemn contract. I believed they represented a mutual vow of protection and partnership. I now recognized them for what they truly were. They were shackles designed to tether my earning potential to his family's insatiable vanity. I grasped the platinum band with my right thumb and forefinger. I slid the metal over my knuckle. The ring slid off smoothly, leaving a faint indentation on my skin, a temporary physical memory of a permanent mistake. I did not throw the rings at him. I did not toss them onto the floor in a dramatic theatrical display of rage. Such actions belong to a woman who still cares enough to inflict a wound. I simply wanted the transaction to be closed. A few feet away, the junior caterer stood frozen, observing the quiet destruction of the Caldwell heir. He still held a small, polished silver tray, previously used to pass expensive hors d'oeuvres to the elite guests. I turned slightly, walking the short distance toward the young man. He watched me approach, his posture stiffening with uncertainty. I did not speak. I simply reached out and placed the diamond ring and the platinum band neatly in the center of the silver tray. The metal clinked softly against the polished surface. I treated the jewelry exactly like an empty champagne flute or a discarded linen napkin. It was the refuse of a finished course, an item that no longer served a purpose and needed to be cleared away by the staff. I turned back to Preston. He stared at the rings resting on the catering tray, his face slack with disbelief. The physical removal of the rings severed the final tether holding us together. The marriage was over, concluded with the same cold efficiency I used to sever his father's federal logistics contract. The ledger was balanced, the accounts were closed, and my business in the Caldwell estate was officially terminated. The quiet that followed the clink of the platinum band against the silver tray did not last long. In the status-obsessed enclaves of Northern Virginia, scandal operates like a highly contagious pathogen. The elite attendees recognize the symptoms of ruin long before the final diagnosis is pronounced. Survival in their ecosystem dictates immediate and total quarantine. The guests in the ballroom began to move. It was not a chaotic stampede. It was a swift, synchronized retreat of 200 people desperate to distance themselves from ground zero. Chairs scraped against the polished hardwood floors. Women gathered their expensive silk wraps, keeping their heads lowered to avoid any accidental eye contact with the disgraced hosts. Men checked their smartphones, muttering hushed, fabricated excuses to their tablemates about urgent late-night conference calls and sudden family emergencies. They abandoned their half-eaten plates of roasted tenderloin and their crystal glasses of expensive red wine. The mass exodus transformed the lavish anniversary gala into a crime scene that no one wanted to be caught standing in. The coat check in the grand foyer quickly became a bottleneck of panicked elites, all eager to retrieve their belongings and flee the Caldwell estate into the cool autumn night. While the guests executed their flawless social retreat, the two federal security officers who had arrived with Marcus Reynolds initiated their own protocol. They possessed no interest in the evaporating party. They moved across the empty space of the ballroom with calibrated, undeniable purpose. Their target was Richard Caldwell. Richard was still standing near the podium at Table 1, watching his lifelong friends and trusted business partners abandon him without a second glance. The federal officers flanked him, establishing a tight physical perimeter that offered no avenue for escape. The senior officer spoke in a low, resonant baritone that carried over the shuffling footsteps of the departing crowd. "Richard Caldwell," the officer stated, keeping his posture rigid and his hands resting near his utility belt, "we require your immediate presence at the regional field office for a formal debriefing. We have logged an unauthorized intrusion originating from your residential IP address into a restricted logistics server." Richard opened his mouth, his chest heaving under his tailored tuxedo jacket. He raised his hands in a frantic, placating gesture. He attempted to deploy the same charming negotiation tactics he used to secure commercial real estate permits. "Gentlemen, please," Richard stammered, his voice cracking under the strain. "This is a terrible misunderstanding. I am hosting a private event. My attorneys can clear this up in the morning. I am a respected member of this community." "Your community's standing is irrelevant to the data breach," the second officer replied, his tone devoid of any conversational warmth. "You will accompany us voluntarily right now, or we will escalate the nature of this detention. The choice is yours, Mr. Caldwell." The illusion of his untouchable status vanished. Richard looked at the federal agents, realizing his country club membership offered zero protection against a cyber espionage inquiry. He lowered his hands. His shoulders slumped, draining the last reserve of manufactured dignity from his frame. He nodded slowly, surrendering to the inevitable. The officers guided him away from the head table, steering him toward the side exit to avoid the congested main foyer. The patriarch of the Caldwell family was escorted out of his own party, reduced to a detained suspect in a federal investigation. Victoria watched her husband being led away through the service corridor. She turned her head and saw Madeline weeping alone at the head table, her wealthy fiancé long gone. She saw Preston staring blankly at the silver catering tray, holding my discarded wedding rings. She looked out at the empty chairs, the abandoned champagne flutes, and the scattered, misprinted place cards. Her world, built on careful curation and stolen money, was reduced to ashes in less than 20 minutes. The realization fractured her mind. The pristine, aristocratic mask she had worn for 3 decades cracked and fell away, revealing the terrified, bitter woman hiding underneath. She needed a target. She needed to aim her devastation at the person responsible for dismantling her stage. Victoria locked her eyes on me. Her manicured hands curled into tight fists. She charged forward, her high heels clicking erratically across the floor. She did not care about maintaining her poise. She threw away every lesson in etiquette she had ever preached. "You ungrateful little urchin!" Victoria screamed. Her voice was shrill, echoing painfully against the high ceilings of the empty ballroom. The remaining catering staff paused their cleanup duties, turning their heads to witness the matriarch lose her final shred of sanity. She stopped just 3 feet away from me, her face flushed a dark, angry crimson. "We gave you everything. We took you in. We gave you a name that means something in this town. And this is how you repay us? You humiliate my family. You ruin my anniversary. You destroy my husband." She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. Her breathing was ragged, her chest heaving with unrestrained fury. She resorted to the only weapon she believed she still possessed. She threatened social annihilation. "I will ruin you," Victoria spat, her eyes wide and manic. "I will call every board member, every senator, every firm in this district. I will have you blacklisted. You will never work in Northern Virginia again. You will be nothing. You are nothing without us." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match her hysterical pitch. I did not feel threatened by her declarations. Threat analysts evaluate risks based on the enemy's capacity to inflict harm. Victoria's capacity was 0. She was a woman aiming an empty gun, oblivious to the fact that she had run out of ammunition. I adjusted my posture, standing tall in the cheap mustard yellow dress she had given me. I looked down at her, maintaining a serene, unbroken gaze. I studied her frantic, trembling form the same way I would study a neutralized line of malicious code. "You cannot ruin a reputation you never bothered to understand, Victoria," I said quietly. My voice was smooth, carrying the calm, steady rhythm of absolute certainty. The quiet delivery forced her to stop screaming and listen. "You operate in a world of galas, floral arrangements, and country club gossip," I explained, breaking down her delusion piece by piece. "I operate in a world of encrypted servers, federal clearances, and national security. Your influence stops at the exact moment a digital threat is detected. You cannot blacklist me from an industry you do not even possess the clearance to enter." Victoria stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of water. Her threats bounced off my reality, useless and irrelevant. She finally understood that I had never needed her approval, her money, or her surname. I was the architect of my own life, and she was merely a temporary, unpleasant assignment I had just completed. Before Victoria could attempt another desperate retort, Marcus Reynolds stepped forward. He moved into the space between us, acting as a physical barrier that shielded me from the Caldwell wreckage. He did not look at Victoria. He treated her with the same dismissive indifference he had shown Richard. Marcus turned to me, his expression shifting from the cold authority he directed at the Caldwells to the professional respect he reserved for his executive team. He raised his left arm, checking the time on his intricate mechanical watch. "Vice President Marcus announced," his voice projecting clear and firm across the ballroom. "The helicopter is waiting on the south lawn. The Pentagon expects our threat containment briefing in exactly 20 minutes. We need to depart." The statement was the ultimate, undeniable exit. It was a lifeline forged in steel and federal authority. I was not fleeing the country club in tears. I was not sneaking out the back door to avoid a family argument. I was being extracted from a trivial social gathering by a defense industry titan to deliver critical intelligence to the highest military officials in the country. The contrast between Victoria's petty vindictive squabbles and my national-level responsibilities cemented the victory in a way no argument ever could. I looked at Marcus and offered a curt, professional nod. "I am ready, Marcus. Let us go." I turned my back on Victoria Caldwell. I did not look at Preston, and I did not look at Madeline. I adjusted the strap of my sensible canvas tote bag upon my shoulder. I walked away from the ruined family, leaving them to navigate the catastrophic consequences of their own greed. I walked toward the heavy oak doors, stepping out of the stagnant air of their fabricated legacy and into the sharp, clear reality of my own making. I turned my back on Victoria Caldwell. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the grand ballroom served as my singular focal point. I stepped forward, initiating my departure from a world built entirely on fraud. The physical atmosphere of the country club had fundamentally altered during the past 10 minutes. When I first arrived, I was an invisible entity, a convenient target for a cruel joke delivered from a brightly lit stage. I was the poor wife assigned to a hidden table near the kitchen. Now I possessed a gravitational pull that repelled every person in my path. The remaining guests, the same defense lobbyists and regional power brokers who had chuckled into their crystal flutes at my expense, physically parted to make way for me. They stepped backward, their polished leather shoes scraping against the hardwood floor. They created a wide, unobstructed corridor for my exit. They did not look at me with the polite, manufactured warmth they reserved for their peers. They looked at me with a profound, terrified respect. I watched a senior senator lower his gaze as I passed his table. I saw the wife of a federal judge pull her silk wrap tight around her shoulders, shrinking away from my trajectory. They recognized the lethal efficiency of my profession. They understood that the digital weapons I wielded could dismantle their own carefully curated lives with a few keystrokes. I did not offer them a reassuring smile. I did not acknowledge their fear. I simply walked through the space they surrendered. I approached the head table. The epicenter of the Caldwell illusion lay in absolute ruins. Madeline sat in her velvet chair, the posture of a confident heiress, entirely broken. She was weeping loudly, her shoulders shaking with every breath. Dark streaks of expensive mascara ran down her cheeks, staining the flawless silk of her designer gown. Her carefully constructed future was evaporating before her eyes. I glanced toward the side exit just in time to watch her fiancé walk through the door. He did not look back. He did not offer a word of comfort. He treated his departure like a calculated divestment from a toxic asset. Madeline reached out toward the empty space he left behind, a pathetic grasping gesture that yielded nothing. She had spent her entire life believing her surname and her wardrobe guaranteed her a seat at the highest tables. She had mocked my practical shoes and intentionally stained my dress, assuming her cruelty carried no consequences. Now, she was discovering the harsh reality of her own irrelevance. The money was gone. The prestige was a lie. The fiancé who evaluated her like a stock option had cut his losses. She was left with a closet full of clothes and a legacy of debt. I felt no pity for her. Pity requires a foundation of shared humanity, and Madeline had traded hers for a country club membership long ago. I kept walking. Preston stood a few feet away from his sister. He was frozen, rooted to the spot, near the silver catering tray that held my discarded wedding rings. His hands hung loosely at his sides. The smooth, charming exterior he relied on to navigate the world had melted away, leaving a vacant, terrified expression. He looked at me as I drew near. His eyes were wide, silently begging for a reprieve that he knew I would never grant. For years, Preston had played a dangerous game of passive complicity. He enjoyed the financial stability provided by my career, while simultaneously indulging the aristocratic fantasies of his parents. He believed he could inhabit both worlds without paying the toll for either. He assumed my loyalty was an infinite resource, an unconditional safety net that would catch him whenever his family experienced a setback. The stark, undeniable truth finally settled over him. He had traded a brilliant, steadfast partner for a bankrupt facade. He had sacrificed the only genuine stability in his life to protect an illusion that his father had built on stolen funds. He opened his mouth, perhaps attempting to offer another hollow apology, but the words died in his throat. I did not pause my stride. I did not offer him a final, lingering look of regret. He was no longer my husband. He was a closed file, a concluded operation. I walked past him, severing the final invisible thread that connected my life to his. The double doors of the ballroom were only a few yards away. As I neared the exit, a figure stepped out from the shadows near the service corridor. It was the junior caterer, the young man who had earlier assumed I was part of the event staff. He did not carry the anxious, hurried demeanor he had displayed during the cocktail hour. He stood tall, holding a single, flawless crystal flute filled with expensive imported champagne. This was the vintage Richard had purchased using my stolen salary. The bottles originally reserved strictly for the head table. The young man extended his arm, offering the glass to me. His expression carried a quiet, undeniable solidarity. He had read the financial ledger, he understood the scale of the theft, and the magnitude of the justice I had just delivered. He was offering a silent tribute from the working class to the woman who had brought the aristocracy to its knees. I paused. I reached out and took the delicate crystal stem between my fingers. The chilled glass felt sharp and real against my skin. I raised the flute, acknowledging his gesture with a slight, respectful nod. I took a single sip. The champagne was dry, crisp, and immaculate. I did not swallow the rest. I set the glass down gently on an empty serving tray resting on a nearby high-top table. The symbolic victory was sufficient. I pushed the heavy oak doors open. The brass hinges yielded with a smooth, silent grace. I crossed the threshold, stepping out of the grand ballroom and into the wide foyer. The chaotic sounds of the party collapsing spilled out behind me. I could hear Victoria sobbing, her high-pitched wails echoing against the floral arrangements. I could hear Richard arguing frantically with the federal security officers, his voice cracking as they escorted him toward the service exit. The cacophony was a symphony of their own destruction, a fitting soundtrack for the end of the Caldwell Empire. I did not look back. The heavy doors swung shut, cutting off the noise with a thick, satisfying finality. The silence of the country club lobby was immediate and profound. I walked through the main entrance and stepped out into the cool Northern Virginia night. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves and damp asphalt. The sharp temperature cleared the stagnant, oppressive atmosphere of the gala from my lungs. The synthetic material of the mustard yellow dress felt rigid against the evening breeze, a final reminder of the costume I would never wear again. Marcus Reynolds waited near the curb. A sleek black armored sport utility vehicle idled quietly on the circular driveway, prepared to transport us to the secured helipad. The tinted windows obscured the interior, projecting an aura of impenetrable security. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the rear passenger door for me. I approached the vehicle, my sensible canvas tote bag resting securely against my hip. I did not feel the lingering sting of a failed marriage or the sorrow of a fractured family. I felt the sharp, focused clarity of a professional returning to duty. I climbed into the back of the armored vehicle. The heavy door closed, sealing me inside a climate-controlled sanctuary of leather and tinted glass. The engine engaged a low, powerful rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. The driver shifted into gear, steering the vehicle away from the country club and toward the perimeter gates. I reached into my tote bag and retrieved my encrypted tablet. I authenticated my credentials, watching the restricted defense portal illuminate the dark interior of the cabin. The interface populated with real-time threat assessments, active network logs, and classified intelligence briefings. The domestic drama was a closed chapter. I tapped the screen, filtering the incoming data streams, immediately transitioning back into my true element. 6 months is a long time in the intelligence sector. It is an eternity in the social ecosystem of Northern Virginia. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse apartment in Arlington, watching the morning traffic crawl along the Potomac River. The glass was reinforced, soundproofed, and tinted to prevent external surveillance. The space was a stark contrast to the heavy, oppressive colonial architecture of the Caldwell estate. My walls were painted a crisp, immaculate white. The furniture was minimalist, chosen for function and clean lines rather than perceived aristocratic heritage. There were no antique silver trays hiding past-due property tax notices. There was only the quiet humming efficiency of a life built on a solid, unshakable foundation. As the Vice President of Threat Intelligence, my daily reality involves briefing federal agencies and neutralizing digital incursions before they materialize into public crises. I manage a division of highly trained analysts. I dictate the security protocols for defense contracts worth billions of dollars. The salary is substantial, but the true currency of my position is the autonomy it provides. I answer to Marcus Reynolds, the executive board, and my own ethical compass. I no longer report to a matriarch who judges my worth by the designer label stitched inside my collar. The mustard yellow dress is gone, discarded in a donation bin on my way home from the Alexandria Country Club that night. I now wear tailored suits that project authority garments, purchased with my own earnings, unburdened by the expectations of a family clinging to a fabricated legacy. The dismantling of the Caldwell empire did not occur overnight, but the trajectory was irreversible from the moment I tapped the execution command on my tablet. The federal security officers who escorted Richard through the service corridor delivered him directly to a regional field office. He assumed his political connections would secure a quiet release. He discovered quickly that elected officials treat indicted cybercriminals like active biological hazards. The federal prosecutors did not offer a polite settlement. They unsealed an indictment charging him with severe violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, alongside multiple counts of wire fraud related to his offshore shell companies. The commercial real estate firm collapsed within 48 hours of his arrest. Creditors descended upon his assets like vultures circling a fresh carcass. The sprawling brick estate at the end of the winding driveway was quietly foreclosed upon by a consortium of lenders. The mahogany dining table, where I had endured countless passive insults, was auctioned off to satisfy a fraction of the outstanding debt. The crystal chandeliers were uninstalled. The imported luxury vehicles were repossessed by the banks. Victoria Caldwell was forced to vacate the premises on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The Society columnist she spent decades courting published veiled, gleeful reports about her sudden relocation to a cramped rented condominium on the outskirts of the county. She lost her country club membership due to unpaid dues. The women who used to drink her champagne no longer returned her phone calls. She was exiled from the only world she ever cared about, forced to live out her days in the exact socio-economic bracket she had always despised. Madeline did not fare much better. The junior hedge fund manager severed their engagement the morning after the anniversary gala. He cited irreconcilable differences, a polite legal fiction to mask his terror of assuming her family debt. Madeline attempted to leverage her remaining social connections to secure a position at a boutique public relations firm, but the Caldwell name had morphed from a golden ticket into a definitive liability. She currently works as an administrative assistant for a mid-level dental practice, answering phones and scheduling cleanings for the type of people she used to ignore. Then there is Preston, the man who sat silently while his mother mocked my upbringing, the husband who drained my bank account in the middle of the night to fund an illusion. When the federal investigators froze Richard's accounts, Preston's financial safety net vaporized. He was forced to hire his own defense attorneys to navigate the fallout of his father's fraudulent enterprise. The legal retainers drained his modest savings within a month. He abandoned his comfortable low-pressure sales position to take a grueling, commission-only job selling industrial restaurant equipment. He worked 60 hours a week, driving a used sedan across state lines, desperate to generate enough revenue to keep his lawyers working on his father's defense. I walked away from the expansive windows and moved toward my kitchen island. I poured a cup of dark roast coffee from the sleek espresso machine. The stainless steel countertops were spotless. The environment was a sanctuary of my own making. My encrypted personal device vibrated on the counter. It was a secondary phone, a clean number I maintained strictly for legacy administrative matters related to finalizing the divorce decree. I picked up the device. The screen indicated a new voicemail from an unsaved number. I tapped the icon to play the audio file. Preston's voice filled the quiet kitchen. He sounded exhausted. The smooth, practiced charm that used to define his vocal cadence was entirely absent, replaced by a ragged, desperate rasp. "Audrey," Preston began. He paused, exhaling a heavy, trembling breath. "It is Preston. I know you told me never to contact this number, but I did not know who else to call. Things are bad. The lawyers are demanding another retainer fee by Friday, and my commission check is delayed. Victoria is threatening to move in with me because she cannot make her rent, and I just am drowning here, Odds. I really am." He paused again, the silence stretching uncomfortably. He was waiting for a response that would never come, speaking into a digital void. "I am so sorry," Preston continued, his voice cracking under the weight of his own failures. "I think about that night at the gala constantly. I think about what I lost. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw you to the wolves because I was too weak to stand up to my parents. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I am begging you, Audrey, if you could just extend a small, short-term loan to help cover the legal fees this month, just to keep me above water. I will pay you back with interest. Please, just call me." The audio file ended. The automated prompt offered options to save or delete the message. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone. I analyzed my own physiological response. My pulse remained steady, my breathing was even and unhurried. The adrenaline that used to spike whenever the Caldwells demanded my attention was entirely gone. I felt no lingering anger. I felt no vindictive joy. I felt the profound, liberating emptiness of total indifference. Preston was no longer my responsibility. He was a man experiencing the natural, unavoidable consequences of his own cowardice. He had spent his life relying on the labor of others to shield him from reality, and he was still searching for a savior to write a check. He failed to understand that the bank was permanently closed. I tapped the red trash can icon on the screen. The voicemail vanished into the digital ether, erased from existence with a single, effortless motion. I set the phone face down on the granite counter, picked up my coffee mug, and took a slow, appreciative sip. The truth of the matter is that worth is not an inherited trait. It is not measured by old money country club memberships or the approval of people who need you to be small in order for them to feel tall. The Caldwells spent their lives curating an image, terrified that someone might discover the hollow center of their empire. They attacked my modesty because it highlighted their own fraudulence. True power is not forcing someone to fade into the background. True power is building a foundation so strong, so impenetrable, that when someone tries to bury you, they only succeed in digging their own grave. I did not destroy the Caldwell family. I simply handed them the shovels and let them get to work. If you have ever let someone make you small to keep their peace, it is time to stop shrinking. Your quiet competence is not a weakness. It is a weapon waiting to be drawn. Drop a comment if you have ever had to close the account on a toxic family, and hit subscribe. See you in the next story. We live in a world that is constantly shouting. As parents in modern America, we are surrounded by a relentless hum of expectations. The pressure to secure the right zip code, the right schools, and the right pristine image to project to the neighbors. It is exceptionally easy to get caught in the current to believe that our children's success is measured by the trophies on their shelves or the prestige of the universities on their bumper stickers. But occasionally we hear a story that forces us to stop to look in the mirror and to ask ourselves what we are truly building inside our homes. The story of the Caldwell family is one of those mirrors. It is not just a dramatic tale of corporate intrigue and high society revenge. At its core, it is a profound and urgent parable about the spiritual weight of parenting. The trap of the gilded image. The Caldwells represent a specific, pervasive kind of modern tragedy. They built their entire existence on the fragile illusion of external validation. They taught their children, Preston and Madeline, to worship the idol of public perception over genuine substance. In doing so, they raised children who looked flawless on paper, but were spiritually and emotionally hollow. When we prioritize the facade of the American dream over the integrity of the soul, we leave our children fundamentally defenseless. We strip them of the emotional awareness required to navigate genuine hardship. Preston and Madeline were incapable of weathering storms, blind to authentic love, and completely devoid of the personal willpower required to stand up for what is right. When their gilded illusion was finally shattered, they had no inner foundation to fall back on. They simply collapsed under the weight of their own pretense. Cultivating wisdom, the unseen foundation. As we guide our children, we must actively resist the cultural tide that pushes us to curate a flawless image. We must teach them to cultivate wisdom by valuing the unseen over the seen. True wisdom lies in recognizing that a person's worth is never determined by the label stitched into their collar, the balance of their bank account, or the impressive title printed on their business card. It is found in the quiet competence and the unshakable integrity they cultivate when absolutely no one is looking. When Audrey stood in that cheap yellow dress by the kitchen doors, she was the wealthiest and most powerful person in the room because her foundation was built on undeniable truth. We must ask ourselves, are we raising children who require expensive props to feel valuable, Or are we raising children who carry their worth inherently within them? Instilling morality in the shadows. Furthermore, we must instill a sense of morality that extends far beyond performative charity or public relations. The Caldwells' ultimate failure was not a financial collapse. It was a profound moral bankruptcy. They treated those they deemed beneath them with casual cruelty and suffocating arrogance. In a traditional family structure, fairness and honesty must be the absolute bedrock of how we operate and interact with the world. We must teach our children that true character is revealed in the shadows. It is demonstrated in how you speak to the catering staff, how you treat the marginalized, and how you behave toward the people from whom you have absolutely nothing to gain. Authentic morality is a compass that never changes direction based on the audience in the room. If we do not model this fairness at home, we inadvertently raise children who measure human beings like commodities. Forging willpower and emotional awareness. Perhaps the most heartbreaking lesson comes from the husband Preston. He was a boy raised in a bubble of supreme comfort, explicitly taught to avoid friction and to always choose the path of least resistance. When the ultimate test arrived, when he had to choose between the difficult truth and his comfortable lie, he lacked the spiritual willpower to defend his own wife. As parents, our instinct is to protect our children. We want to smooth the road for them and spare them the pain of failure. But we must realize that if we constantly step in to buy their way out of consequences, we are destroying their resilience. We must allow our children to face adversity and to endure discomfort. Willpower is a muscle. If we never let them carry a heavy load, that muscle atrophies, leaving them weak when the world inevitably demands strength. Emotional awareness is the quiet, steady pulse of a healthy family. It is the ability to look at our spouses, our children, and ourselves with unvarnished honesty. The Caldwells lacked this entirely. They communicated in transactions rather than truths. A traditional family thrives not because it looks perfect in a holiday card, but because its members are taught to sit with uncomfortable emotions. They are taught to say, "I was wrong," and "I am sorry," and to actually mean it. Preston could only offer empty apologies because he was never taught the emotional vocabulary of genuine accountability. We must break these generational cycles. We must sit with our children in their failures, teaching them that making a mistake does not diminish their worth, but lying to cover it up diminishes their soul. The legacy of the traditional family. Let us look closely at our own dining room tables. Are we fostering an environment where our children feel safe telling us the truth, even when it is ugly or inconvenient? Or are we implicitly demanding a performance? The pressure to maintain a legacy often turns homes into stages and family members into actors reciting lines. When we strip away the expectations of society, the defense contracts, the country club memberships, and the designer clothes, what remains? It is the quiet, sacred responsibility of raising a human being who will one day walk out into the world and either heal it or harm it. The greatest inheritance a parent can leave a child is never a trust fund, a property deed, or a legacy surname. It is an unshakable inner foundation. When we raise children who are anchored in their own truth, they do not need to diminish others to feel tall, and they do not crumble to dust when the world challenges their standing. They stand firm, rooted in the timeless values of honesty, fairness, and deep emotional awareness. They become the kind of adults who can look at a crumbling facade and confidently walk away into the cool night air, secure in who they are. Stories like Audrey's remind us that the truth always eventually finds its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it is buried under silver trays and polite country club chatter. If this narrative resonated with your own journey of parenting family and building a meaningful life, please subscribe and follow our channel, QT Told Stories, for more narratives that look beneath the surface. We share tales that challenge our perspectives and encourage us to grow. As the lights go down on the Caldwell estate, leaving behind nothing but echoes and empty rooms, we are left to sweep our own porches. We look at the sleeping faces of our children bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight, and we wonder what seeds we watered today. Did we plant the heavy, hollow roots of the world's approval? Or did we plant something quieter, something that will hold fast when the inevitable storms arrive? The wind is always blowing, and tomorrow we will see what stands.